On Tuesday, the 12th of May, 1981, at 5:18 p.m., the payphone in the grocery store vestibule was already warm from a day of hands. The glass doors kept cycling open and shut, letting in the smell of car exhaust and cut grass from the shoulder of Route 50. The cashier had been on register since noon. Her apron pocket held a pen, a damp receipt stub, and a roll of paper that always seemed to run low at rush hour. When the drawer popped, it made the same hollow clap against the metal rail. She fed quarters into the change cup with her thumb, listened for the right rattle, and slid bills flat so the corners lined up. Most customers treated the vestibule like a hallway. They paused only long enough to shake rain off a jacket or look at the bulletin board with lost dog flyers and babysitting numbers. The payphone sat in its niche beside the carts, a gray box with a curled cord and a little shelf dusted with fingerprints. Near the end of the afterwork surge, a man in a light windbreaker came through the doors carrying a folded newspaper under one arm. He picked up a half-gallon of milk, added a pack of gum at the last second, and paid with exact change without counting it twice. He didn't look at the cashier's face. He looked at the register display, as if he wanted the numbers to confirm something. Instead of heading straight out, he turned back toward the vestibule. The cashier saw him through the gap between the candy rack and the cigarette case. He stopped at the payphone, set the newspaper on the shelf, and dropped a quarter into the slot. The call was short, not dramatic. He held the receiver tight to his ear and kept his other hand down by his side, still, like he was waiting for instructions he already knew. His mouth moved once, maybe twice. Then he listened. The fluorescent light above him blinked and steadied. When he hung up, he pressed the coin return lever with the same flat motion people used to check for change. The metal flap clicked. A single quarter slid into the tray. He didn't take it. He didn't glance around, either. He left the quarter balanced on the lip of the tray, perfectly exposed, and picked up his newspaper as if he'd done nothing unusual at all. He walked out at the same pace he'd come in, milk swinging once at his side, then settling. The cashier watched the quarter for a few seconds longer than she meant to. A line formed again. She turned back to her register, tore a strip of receipt tape by feel, and forced her hands into the rhythm of scanning and bagging. When the rush thinned, she stepped to the vestibule under the pretense of straightening the cart row. The quarter was still there. Cool now. Ordinary. The kind of coin that could have come from any pocket in the county. She picked it up with 2 fingers and held it against her palm, as if warmth might tell her anything. Then she set it in the small ceramic dish under her register where she kept foreign pennies and the occasional button someone dropped. At 5:31 p.m., the doors chimed again, and another customer came in, already reaching into his pocket for change. The cashier looked past him, back to the payphone niche, and made herself a quiet rule for the next time she saw that windbreaker. She would not touch the tray until she'd watched where his hands went. 16 days later, Thursday, the 28th of May, 1981, the vestibule felt tighter than it had any right to. The after-work crowd arrived in waves, and the glass doors kept slapping shut behind people who didn't slow down. At 5:12 p.m., the cashier's receipt tape ran out mid-sale, and she had to thumb a fresh roll into the slot while a customer drummed their fingers on the counter. She kept her eyes moving the way she always did when the line got long. Hands, carts, the small shelf of candy, the payphone niche. Not because she expected anything, because she'd made herself a rule. The quarter from the first time was still in the ceramic dish under her register, sitting among odd pennies and a button with a cracked rim. She had picked it up twice at home, once while emptying her apron pocket, and once while rinsing the dish in the sink, and both times it had stayed a quarter, no hidden weight, no secret mark she could see. Still, she hadn't spent it. On May 28, she was working the same register, same shift, same stretch of late afternoon where everyone seemed to be in a hurry but no one moved quickly. She watched the wall clock above the cigarettes without staring at it. She listened for the door chime without turning her head. At 5:19 p.m., a man in a light windbreaker entered with a folded newspaper under his arm. He moved like someone replaying a route. Not rushed, not slow. He picked up a half-gallon of milk, added gum at the last second, and brought everything to her lane even though the next register had a shorter line. When he paid, he slid coins onto the counter in a neat little stack, then waited for her to count them out loud with her fingertips. She didn't. She scooped the stack once, let it clink into the till, and pushed his receipt across the counter with the gum. He didn't look at the receipt. He didn't look at her. His eyes flicked to the register display the same way they had before, as if the numbers mattered more than the items. Then he turned back toward the vestibule. The cashier didn't follow. She couldn't. A woman with a basket of frozen dinners stepped up, and the cashier's hands were suddenly busy with cardboard boxes and slick plastic bags. She kept her face neutral and her movements even, but she let her attention stretch sideways to the payphone niche. The man set his newspaper on the payphone shelf. He dropped in a quarter. This time, the call ran a little longer. Not much. Long enough for him to shift his weight once from heel to toe, then settle again. He didn't scan the vestibule. He didn't fidget with the cord. He held the receiver to his ear with a steady pressure, like he was trying not to leave any part of himself behind. He spoke once, just a small movement at the corner of his mouth. Then he listened. The cashier finished ringing up the frozen dinners and handed over change. The customer left, and the line thinned for a moment into a gap. The cashier used the gap the way she used gaps all day. A quick wipe of the counter, a tug to straighten the plastic bag rack, a glance into the vestibule that looked like nothing. The man hung up. He pressed the coin return lever. A single quarter slid into the tray. He didn't take it. He didn't hesitate either. He left it balanced on the lip of the tray, flat and centered, and picked up his newspaper as if he'd forgotten it there. He walked out, milk swinging once at his side, then settling as he crossed the first line of the parking lot. The cashier's hands stayed on the counter until the doors stopped moving. Then she stepped out from behind the register with a practiced purpose, the way you do when you're going to fix something mundane. She grabbed a stray cart and guided it into line. She tugged 2 coupons off the bulletin board that were curling at the corners. She paused by the payphone niche like she was checking the floor for gum. The quarter sat in the tray like a dare. She didn't pick it up right away. She watched it for the few seconds it took a teenager to brush past her toward the doors, close enough that the air moved. The quarter didn't shift. No one noticed it. No one cared. When the vestibule was empty again, she pinched the coin between 2 fingers and slid it into her apron pocket without looking at it. Not into the till. Not into the dish. Somewhere it wouldn't get mixed. Back at her register, she tore off a thin strip of receipt tape and laid it on the counter beside the scanner. She wrote the date in small, careful numbers. Then the time. 5:20 p.m. She circled it once, hard enough to crease the paper. She folded the strip twice and tucked it behind the pen in her apron pocket, right next to the quarter. At 5:23.2, the doors chimed again and another line began to form, and the cashier kept working like nothing had happened, except now. When she heard the payphone click softly in its cradle, she caught herself listening for the coin return flap. Thursday, the 18th of June, 1981, came in thick and wet. The kind of evening where the air inside the store felt used up by 5 o'clock, and the vestibule glass fogged where people leaned a shoulder against it to juggle bags. The cashier had switched her routines in small ways that no one else would notice. She wore the same apron. She smiled the same polite smile. But she stopped emptying her pockets into the kitchen bowl at night. She stopped spending quarters without looking at them. In her purse, tucked behind the coupon envelope, she kept the 2 things she hadn't told anyone about: a folded strip of receipt tape with a circled time, and a quarter that wasn't in her till. She told herself she was being silly, that she was giving meaning to coincidence because shifts were long and life was repetitive and your brain wanted patterns the way your hands wanted to count. Then she remembered how flat that coin had sat in the tray, not dropped, placed. That afternoon, the floor crew had left a mop bucket near the vestibule while they went to fetch more cleaner. It sat there like a warning sign nobody had printed. The cashier watched customers step around it with the same casual grace they used to step around other people's lives. At 5:10 p.m., she checked the wall clock and didn't let her face change. She was on register, but she positioned herself so the candy rack didn't block her view of the payphone niche. She made sure the apron pocket with the pen was on the side she could reach without looking down. The door chime rang at 5:16. Light windbreaker, folded newspaper, milk, gum, exact change. The sameness landed in her chest like a dull weight. He chose her lane again, even with another register open. He didn't hurry. He didn't drag his feet. He moved with the certainty of someone who knew exactly how much time he could spend being ordinary. He set his coins on the counter in a neat stack, quarters and dimes, no pennies. The cashier noticed because pennies were what everyone tried to get rid of. He didn't offer her his palm. He didn't ask for a bag. He waited for the register display to settle on the total and watched the numbers as if they were the real transaction. She rang him up and slid his receipt over. She didn't say anything beyond the required words. He didn't answer them. Then he turned, like a compass needle snapping into place, and walked back toward the vestibule. The cashier kept scanning groceries for the next customer, kept her voice even, but her attention drifted into the corner of her eye. The man laid the newspaper on the payphone shelf. His fingers produced a quarter pinched between thumb and forefinger, and he fed it into the slot. The call was the same kind of call as before, short enough to be nothing, structured enough to be something. He held the receiver tight. He spoke once, barely. Then he listened. His shoulders stayed relaxed, but his head was still in a way that made the rest of the vestibule feel loud. The mop bucket reflected a warped stripe of fluorescent light. Somewhere deeper in the store, a kid dropped a glass jar and someone swore softly. The cashier finished a transaction, gave change, watched the customer leave. For a few seconds, her register was quiet. In that quiet, she watched him hang up. He pressed the coin return lever. The metal flap clicked. A quarter slid out into the tray. He left it. Again. Flat on the lip. Centered. Exposed. The cashier felt a prick of anger, small and unreasonable, like the coin was mocking her for noticing. Like he knew that the act of seeing was the only power she had. He picked up his newspaper, took his milk, and walked out. Same calm pace. Same swing once at his side. Then still. She waited until the vestibule cleared, until the doors stopped moving. Then she stepped out as if to check the mop bucket, as if to make sure someone hadn't slipped. The quarter sat in the tray. This one looked different. It wasn't obvious unless you held it up and let the light catch it. A small nick on the rim. A dull edge where someone had scraped it against metal. The kind of damage that could happen 100 ways. The kind of damage that also made a coin easier to recognize if you needed to find it again. She pinched it between two fingers and let it rest on her palm. She ran her thumb along the rim once, slow, feeling for the nick. Then she did something she hadn't planned to do. She compared it to the quarter already in her pocket from May 28. The earlier coin was smoother. This one had that rough bite on the edge, like a tiny tooth. She didn't put it in the dish. She didn't put it in the till. Instead, she went back to her register, reached under the counter, and pulled out a plain white envelope she used for stray coupons and manager notes. With her pen, she wrote in small block letters, Payphone sex, Atten, Fem, Sutton, PM. She slid the nicked quarter in first, then the earlier quarter, then the folded strip of receipt tape behind them like a bookmark. She closed the flap and pressed it flat with her palm until it held the shape. Later that night, after closing, she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold while she stared at the envelope. She opened it and lined the coins up beside her mug. She took a scrap of notebook paper and wrote 3 dates in a column, each with a time beside it. The ink smeared under her wrist, leaving a faint coffee-stained shadow. On the 3rd line, she paused and added a detail she hadn't expected to matter. Quarter nicked. Then she stopped, because stopping was safer than making it into a story. The next day at work, she checked the payphone tray once, when no one was looking. It was empty. On Thursday, the 9th of July 1981, at 5:19 p.m., the payphone in the grocery vestibule looked the same from 10 feet away. Up close, there was a new sticker on the metal faceplate, bright white against the gray, printed with a service date in small block numbers. The cashier noticed it because she had started noticing everything that was meant to be ignored. The way the coin return flap didn't always sit flush, the faint smear where someone had wiped the shelf with a damp rag and missed the corners, the fluorescent hum that made the vestibule feel like a place you passed through, not a place you stayed. She had traded shifts to be there that afternoon. It wasn't dramatic. She told a coworker she needed Thursday evening hours for something later in the week, and they shrugged and said fine. The manager didn't ask. Schedules were a small economy of favors, and nobody liked to look too closely at the reasons. By 5 o'clock, the after-work line was steady. The cashier kept her register moving and kept the ceramic dish under the counter out of sight. The envelope wasn't in it anymore. The envelope lived in her purse now, tucked behind coupons, flattened by a paperback she didn't read. At 5:18, the door chime rang, and she felt it like a tap on her shoulder. Light windbreaker. Folded newspaper. Milk. Gum. Exact change. He chose her lane again, even with space elsewhere. He placed the coins on the counter in a neat stack. He watched the register display settle. His eyes stayed on the numbers longer than they needed to, as if the total was the only part of the transaction that mattered. She rang him up. She slid the receipt over. She kept her voice even and small. He turned toward the vestibule without hesitation. Like turning was part of the purchase. He set the newspaper on the payphone shelf. He fed a quarter into the slot. The call was short. A few seconds of listening. One small mouth movement. Then more listening. His posture stayed calm, but it had a held quality to it, like a hand hovering over a hot surface without touching. When he hung up, he pressed the coin return lever. A quarter slid into the tray. He left it balanced on the lip. Flat. Centered. Exposed. The cashier's hand stayed busy at the register until the line thinned into a gap. When it did, she stepped out as if to straighten the cart row. She paused beside the payphone niche and looked at the quarter the way you look at a spill before you decide whether it's worth a mop. She did not touch it yet. Her eyes went to the new sticker. The service date was recent 2 days earlier, if she read it right. There was also a small code printed under it, the kind that meant something to someone who carried keys and a clipboard. She memorized the numbers anyway. Back at her register, she tore a strip of receipt tape and wrote, "Payphone, sticker 7/7." She added the time, 5:19, and pressed the tape flat against the counter with her palm until it stayed straight. Then she folded it and slid it into the envelope in her purse without looking around. When she finally returned to the vestibule, the quarter was still there. She pinched it up and pocketed it with the others, keeping it out of the till like she was protecting the till from contagion. At 5:36, the manager came by with a clipboard and a tired look. The cashier waited until he was close enough that she didn't have to raise her voice. "Someone's been leaving money in the payphone tray," she said, keeping it simple. "Same time, same day, a few times now." The manager glanced past her at the vestibule, then back at the line forming. He didn't step out to look. He didn't ask which customer. His mouth tightened in the shape of patience. "People do odd things," he said. "Don't make it a thing." He tapped the clipboard with his pen once, like punctuation, and moved on. The cashier went back to scanning groceries. The register drawer clapped open and shut. Quarters rattled in the cup. Everything sounded normal again, except for the new service sticker sitting in her head like a pin. At 6:02 p.m., when the rush eased, she walked past the vestibule one more time. The payphone tray was empty. Clean. As if someone had cleared it on purpose. The vestibule got noisy in the way it always did when carts jammed at the doors and everyone tried to pass through at once. Wheels squeaked. A kid's sneaker slapped the wet floor mat. Someone held the glass door open with an elbow while they dug for keys, letting humid air roll in and sit on the tile. The cashier kept her hands moving at the register, but her attention kept drifting to the payphone niche like a tongue finding a sore tooth. When she glanced up at the wall clock above the cigarette case, the minute hand was sliding past the 20, and she felt that familiar tightening Thursday again, late July, the same thin slice of time she'd started measuring in secret. Her envelope was in her purse, and her purse was tucked beneath the counter where her knee could touch it. She could feel it there the way you feel a house key in your pocket. Reassurance and an edge. By 5:22 proska mem. The line thickened enough that people stopped pretending they weren't impatient. A man sighed loudly. A woman pushed coupons forward like she was bargaining. Quarters and dimes clinked into the change tray in quick, angry little sounds. Then the door chime rang, and the windbreaker walked in. Folded newspaper, milk, gum. Exact change. The same purchase, repeated until it stopped being a purchase and started being a signal. He chose her lane again. He stacked his coins neatly on the counter and watched the register display settle on the total as if he needed the numbers to confirm a schedule. She rang him up and slid the receipt across without meeting his eyes. He picked up his milk and turned toward the vestibule. The cashier's throat went dry. Not from fear exactly, but from the effort of holding herself still. She had told herself she would only watch. She had told herself she would not touch anything. But the manager's dismissal people do odd things had left a small bitter spot in her, and bitter spots tend to look for something to do. She waited until the next customer stepped up and filled the counter space with groceries. Then, under cover of routine, she took a quarter from her own change cup, one she knew was hers because it had a dull scratch across Washington's cheek, and slid it into her apron pocket. Not a dramatic move. Just money moving from one place to another. The kind of thing no one questioned in a store full of money. A minute later, she stepped out from behind the register with a rag in her hand, as if she'd noticed a spill by the cart row. She didn't rush. Rushing was a spotlight. She moved like an employee doing one more small correction in a building full of small corrections. In the vestibule, the man had set his newspaper on the payphone shelf and dropped a quarter into the slot. He lifted the receiver and stood very still while it rang. His mouth moved once, then stopped. He listened with a patience that didn't belong to a grocery store. The cashier stopped near the carts and wiped the edge of the bulletin board where tape residue collected. She kept her face turned slightly away from him, the way you do when you don't want someone to think you're watching. Her rag moved in circles, her ears stayed open. He hung up. He pressed the coin return lever. A quarter slid into the tray. He left it on the lip, flat and centered, the way he always did. The cashier waited for the smallest opening, a surge of people coming in, shoulders close, a cart bumping the wall. In that brief chaos, she stepped toward the payphone niche as if to wipe the shelf. Her rag passed over the tray. Her fingers closed on the quarter. And in the same motion one practiced by the world's need to make mistakes look like nothing she set her own, scratched quarter onto the lip where his had been. She kept moving. She kept wiping. She kept her breathing even. To anyone else, it was just an employee, tidying a payphone no one owned. But the man had not left yet. He had taken 2 steps toward the doors and then stopped, as if something in the vestibule air had shifted temperature. He turned back, not quickly, carefully. His hand hovered near the coin return tray without touching it. He looked down. He pressed the coin return lever again, though there was no reason to. The flap clicked. Nothing new dropped. He looked down again. For a second, he was perfectly still, windbreaker creased at the elbows. Milk hanging from his fingers like a man listening to a sound only he could hear. Then his thumb and forefinger pinched the quarter from the lip and rolled it once, a tiny turn that would have meant nothing to anyone else. He set it back down. Not in the same place. He set it slightly off-center, as if the alignment had lost its meaning. Then he picked up his newspaper and walked out. But the calm pace had gone tight at the shoulders. In the parking lot, he didn't swing his bag the way people did when they were thinking about dinner. His arm stayed close to his side, contained. He looked once, not a scan, not a search, just a brief look toward the far end of the lot, like checking whether a light was still on. The cashier waited until the vestibule cleared, until she could step over the wet mat without anyone brushing her sleeve. She went to the payphone tray. It was empty. At home that night, she opened the envelope on her kitchen table and lined the quarters up beside a cold cup of coffee. She counted them once. Then, again, her log said there should be one more than what her fingers found. She stared at the gap, listening to the refrigerator cycle on and off. And when she finally looked at the clock above the sink, it read 11:46 p.m. Monday, the 2nd of August 1981, looked nothing like Thursdays. At 9:10 a.m., the store was clean in a way it never managed to be at 5. The floor wax still held a faint chemical shine. The bakery case was full and untouched. The vestibule doors opened and closed for one person at a time, not crowds. The payphone sat in its niche like a forgotten appliance, gray, scuffed, unremarkable. The cashier wasn't scheduled until noon, but the manager had called her the night before and asked if she could stop in for a minute. He said it like it was a small favor. His voice had carried the same tired patience as always, but there was something threaded through it now, something careful. She arrived in plain clothes, holding her purse tighter than she needed to. Inside it, the envelope lay flattened behind coupons and a paperback she hadn't finished in weeks. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. The manager met her at the service desk and didn't make small talk. He guided her through the half-door marked employees only and into the back office where the air smelled like old coffee and toner. A fan clicked in the corner, pushing warm air around a stack of forms that never stopped growing. Someone else was already there. Not a cop, not in uniform. Just a man in a short-sleeved button-down with a tie loosened at the collar, sitting with his hands folded over a thin folder like he was waiting for permission to open it. He stood when she came in, mid-40s. Neat hair. A watch that looked expensive in a quiet way. "Ma'am," he said, and gave the manager a brief nod. "I'm with the phone company's security office." He didn't say his name. The manager didn't offer hers. The cashier realized she hadn't told anyone her name either. In the store, she was Miss, Ma'am, and Hey. Names were what customers used when they were angry enough to complain. The manager pulled a chair out for her. His clipboard lay on the desk, face down, as if the ordinary paper trail wanted no part of this. "Tell him what you told me," the manager said. His tone was controlled. Not supportive, exactly. More like he was walking a tray of glass across a crowded room. The cashier sat. She felt the chair's vinyl stick briefly to the back of her legs. She took a breath and tried to keep her voice from changing shape. "It's the payphone," she said. "Thursdays, around 5:20. Same guy, same thing." She hated how flimsy it sounded when she put it into words. Like superstition. Like gossip. The security man didn't smirk. He didn't look bored. He took out a pen and wrote something down as if she'd said fire alarm or gas leak. "What thing?" he asked. "He makes a call," she said. "Short. He presses the coin, return, and leaves a quarter in the tray. Flat. Centered. Like it's supposed to be found." She paused, then added, because the missing coin still sat in her stomach like a stone. "One time I tried swapping it," he noticed. "And after that, one of the quarters I'd been saving was gone." The manager's mouth tightened. He looked at the desk. Not at her. The security man asked for dates. She opened her purse, pulled out the envelope, and set it on the desk. The paper looked harmless against the blotter, like a coupon packet. Her fingers hesitated on the flap, then lifted it. Inside were quarters dull, ordinary coins and thin paper slips folded into tight rectangles. She slid them out carefully, like the air might erase something. The receipt tape strips lay on the desk first. Dates and times in her small handwriting, circled so hard the paper creased. Then the coins, lined in a row. The nicked one sat among them like a tooth. The security man watched without interrupting. When she was done, he nodded once, like she'd provided something measurable. He opened his folder. The papers inside weren't dramatic, no seals, no big stamps, just photocopies and typed lines arranged in boxes, the kind of paperwork that only existed to make sure no one could later claim they hadn't known. He slid one sheet toward the manager and pointed with his pen. "This is the service and collection schedule for that unit," he said. "Who opens it, when, and under whose key?" The cashier leaned in despite herself. She saw dates, route codes, initials. The same sort of marks she'd seen on shipments and invoices, but tighter, less forgiving. "The sticker you mentioned," he continued, "is logged here. So are the coin box pulls." The manager frowned at the page. "So you can tell if money's missing?" "We can tell what was collected and when," the security man said. "We can tell whether the box was opened outside schedule. We can tell whether a key is being used when it shouldn't be." He looked at the cashier's lined-up quarters, then back to the paper. "And we can tell when a phone becomes a rendezvous point, because someone repeats a behavior around it." The word rendezvous sounded too big for a grocery store. It made the back office feel smaller. The manager shifted in his chair. "So what is this, exactly?" The security man didn't answer directly. He used the careful language of a man who knew he might be quoted later. "It's consistent," he said. "That's what it is. Consistent enough that it's worth treating as intentional." He picked up one of her receipt tape strips, held it close, and read the circled time. He didn't touch the coins. "We'll do two things," he said, and tapped his pen lightly against the paper. "First, we'll tighten the chain on this unit key control, service access, all of it. Second, we'll coordinate with the appropriate authorities. If it repeats, we can request additional technical measures." The cashier felt her throat tighten. "Authorities," she said, and hated how small her voice sounded. The security man met her eyes briefly, then looked away in a way that wasn't avoidance so much as discipline. "Federal interest," he said, as if he were naming the weather. "Not your problem. Your job is to keep doing your job, and if it happens again, to notice what you already know how to notice." The manager cleared his throat. "So what do we do in the meantime?" The security man closed the folder halfway, leaving one corner of a page visible like a reminder. "We don't post anything," he said. "No signs, no out of order, no repairs announced. We keep the routine stable." He nodded toward the cashier's envelope. "And we stop anyone from testing the pattern again. No swapping coins. No touching the tray until you can document it." The cashier flushed, half with embarrassment, half with anger at herself for having acted on impulse in a place where impulse was a liability. The manager finally looked at her, and his expression wasn't apology. Exactly. It was the uneasy recognition that a small thing had become bigger without asking permission. "Can you be here Thursday?" he asked. She thought of the envelope's missing quarter, the way the windbreaker had paused, the way he'd rolled the swapped coin like he was reading it. "Yes," she said. The security man stood, gathered his papers, and placed them back into the folder with a neatness that felt practiced. As he reached for the door, he paused and glanced at the lined-up quarters once more. "Keep that envelope," he said. "Don't spend them. Don't show them around. If anyone asks, it's just coins you found under the register." Then he left the back office as quietly as he'd entered. Out on the floor, the store's morning calm continued, customers picking up bread, carts rolling, the deli slicer starting its slow hum. The payphone in the vestibule sat exactly where it always had, still scuffed, still ordinary. If you didn't know what to look for, nothing had changed. The back office always smelled like old coffee and warm paper. A fan clicked in the corner, pushing the same tired air over a desk that never got cleared, only rearranged. The manager held the door for her without looking directly at her face, like eye contact might turn a favor into a conversation. When she stepped in, the wall clock above the filing cabinet showed 9:10 a.m., and the date strip on the daily schedule said Monday, the 2nd of August 1981, in the manager's blunt handwriting. Morning quiet still clung to the store out front. In here, it was just staplers, forms, and the soft grit of carbon copies. Someone else was sitting in the spare chair. Not police, not uniform. A man in a short-sleeved button-down with his tie loosened, hands folded on a thin folder, as if he'd been taught not to fidget. He stood when she entered, polite and controlled. "I'm with the phone company's security office," he said. The words sounded ordinary until they didn't. The manager motioned her into the chair opposite the desk. His clipboard lay face down, like it wanted no part of what was happening. He kept his voice low. "Tell him what you told me," he said. The cashier felt the weight of her purse against her knee. The envelope inside it had gone from coins to proof, without her permission. She kept her voice small on purpose. "It's the payphone," she said. "Thursdays, around 5:20. Same man, same thing. He calls, presses the coin return, and leaves a quarter in the tray, balanced, like it's meant for someone." The security man didn't smile. He didn't nod too quickly. He just opened his folder and took out a pen. "How many times?" he asked. "4," she said. Then, because the missing coin still bothered her in a physical way, she added, "One time I tried switching it." He noticed. After that, one of the quarters I'd saved was gone. The manager's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. The security man's eyes flicked to her purse. "Did you keep anything?" he asked, careful with the word anything. She set the purse on the desk and pulled out the envelope. It looked ridiculous in the fluorescent light plain white paper with her block letters on the front. She opened the flap and laid out what she had. First, the receipt tape strips, dates and circled times, folded and refolded until the paper held creases like a habit. Then the quarters, lined in a row, dull in a way coins get when you stop spending them. The nicked quarter sat among the others like a small, private identifier. The security man didn't touch the coins. He read the receipt tape, one strip at a time, like he was checking a timetable. Then he slid one of his photocopied sheets across the desk. It was a log, not a secret. Boxes, codes, initials, a service and collection schedule for that payphone unit when it was opened, who had key custody, which route pulled the coin box, which date matched which sticker. "The service tag you noticed," he said, tapping one line with his pen, "is recorded here. So are the coin box pulls." The manager leaned in. "So, you can tell if money's missing?" he asked. "We can tell when the unit is accessed," the security man said. "We can tell if a key is used outside the normal route window. And we can tell when a phone becomes a meeting point because behavior repeats in a tight time band." The word meeting point made the cashier's skin prickle. She stared at the quarters and hated how normal they looked. The security man kept his tone neutral. "This is consistent enough to treat as intentional," he said. "Next steps are procedural. Key control gets tightened. Access gets documented. And we coordinate with the appropriate authorities." "Authorities," the cashier repeated before she could stop herself. He met her eyes briefly. "Not your problem," he said. "Your job is what it's been. Watch the routine. Don't intervene. Don't test it again. If it happens, you document the time and what your eyes can honestly say you saw." The manager exhaled through his nose, like he'd been holding breath without noticing. "So we don't put up signs," he said, more statement than question. "No," the security man said. "No, out of order. No announced repairs. Stability matters." He nodded once at the envelope. "Keep that at home. If anyone asks, it's coins you found under the register." As the fested. When he left, the door clicked shut, with the same soft finality as a cash drawer closing. The manager stayed seated, looking at the lined-up quarters as if they might start explaining themselves. After a moment, he pulled the weekly schedule closer and circled a block with his pen. "Thursday, evening." "You'll be here," he said. Not a request this time. She slid the envelope back into her purse and felt the weight settle against her palm. Out on the floor, the store's morning routine kept going. In the vestibule, the payphone waited in its niche, scuffed and ordinary, and in the middle of that ordinary week, a small slice of Thursday had already been claimed. Thursday, the 10th of September, 1981, arrived with a sky that looked scrubbed clean late summer, turning itself into something sharper. By 4:30 p.m., the after-work traffic was already stacking up out on Route 50, and inside the grocery store the air conditioner fought a losing battle against bodies and open doors. The cashier noticed the first plane car because it didn't belong to the parking lot. It sat across the way in a space nobody chose unless they wanted to see the entrances. A beige sedan, with nothing on it, no dents, no stickers, no personality. The driver's window was down a crack. The man inside wasn't reading a paper or eating fries. He was just waiting. 10 minutes later, there was a second one. A darker car, parked 2 rows over, angled like an accident that had landed neatly. A different man behind the wheel. Same posture, same stillness. If you didn't know to look for it, you wouldn't. If you did, you couldn't look away. The cashier kept scanning groceries. She didn't stare. She didn't point. She let the day be the day, because that's what she'd been told to do. Then she saw the payphone. Someone had taped a small white placard over the coin slot. Out of order. Fresh tape corners. Pressed down hard. The sign wasn't the store's no logo, no manager's handwriting. It looked like something printed in an office that had too many printers and too few conversations. Her stomach tightened. No signs, the security man had said. Stability mattered. Yet here it was, announcing disruption to anyone who cared to read. At 5:58 p.m., the after-work wave hit in earnest. The door chime rang constantly. Carts jammed at the vestibule, squealing on the wet mat. The cashier kept her voice even while a man argued about a coupon that expired yesterday, and a woman insisted the price on the shelf had been different. She checked the wall clock without moving her head. Lödenling Sanfen, Lödenling Siefen. At 6:05, the door chime rang, and she felt her hands go cold. Light windbreaker, folded newspaper, milk, gum. He entered like he always did, but his eyes didn't go to the store first. They went to the vestibule, to the payphone niche, like he was checking whether a room was still where he left it. He chose her lane anyway, even though a different register was open and moving faster. He stacked exact change on the counter in the same neat column. He watched the register display settle on the total with that same quiet insistence, as if numbers were the true signal and groceries were the cover. She rang him up and slid the receipt across. He didn't take it. He picked up his milk and turned back toward the vestibule. The cashier's mouth went dry. She didn't move from behind the register. She didn't give herself away with a glance. She let her hands keep working, scan, bag, change, while her peripheral vision held the payphone niche like a bruise. He reached the payphone shelf and set the newspaper down. Then he saw the sign. He stood there a half-second longer than any normal person would stand in front of a broken payphone. His head tipped slightly, reading. Not confused. Evaluating. A man measuring the distance between expectation and reality. He lifted the receiver anyway. The dead weight of it was visible in his wrist. No dial tone. He held it to his ear for a beat just long enough to confirm what he already knew, then placed it back down with care, not irritation. He didn't slam it. He didn't show anger. He pressed the coin return lever. Once, twice. A pointless gesture, except it wasn't pointless to him. His eyes went to the tray, checking for what shouldn't be there, checking for what had always been there. He paused with his hand hovering near his pocket, not reaching, not withdrawing, just hovering, like a man deciding whether to move forward or erase himself. Outside the doors, the beige sedan's driver shifted slightly. The dark car's driver raised his chin a fraction, as if tracking by instinct rather than sight. The cashier felt it all as pressure more than image, like the air in the vestibule had thickened. The windbreaker man stepped back from the payphone and changed his route. Instead of going straight out the front doors, he moved toward the far side exit near the seasonal aisle, an exit shoppers used when they wanted a shorter path to the side lot. He walked faster than he had before, not running, but with his shoulders drawn tight, his milk held close to his body so it wouldn't swing. The cashier didn't follow. She couldn't. She stayed where she belonged, behind the register, watching through reflections and glass. But she saw the cars move, not both at once, not dramatically. The beige sedan rolled forward first, slow enough to look accidental. The dark car waited 10 seconds, then eased out like it had simply decided to leave. Later, she would learn this part in pieces, through the manager's tight voice and the quick, clipped words of men who didn't linger. Those cars followed him beyond the parking lot, beyond the strip mall lights, into a grid of low streets where porches sat close to sidewalks. They wrote down what mattered. A repeated destination block, not a single address. The building he approached without looking up at the windows. The buzzer panel he didn't use. The way he didn't press a name, didn't announce himself, just reached under the edge of the panel and found what he needed. They noted how he chose the stairwell instead of the elevator, how he disappeared into the building like someone who'd done it before, and how, 5 minutes later, the beige sedan didn't leave. It just sat there, engine off, watching an entrance that looked as ordinary as a grocery vestibule until you knew what passed through it. Sunday, the 13th of September, 1981, at 11:40 p.m., the street where the windbreaker man had disappeared was quiet in the way neighborhoods get when everyone has already decided the day is over. Porch lights glowed behind curtains. A television flickered blue through a second-floor window and then dimmed, like someone fell asleep with the sound still on. 2 plain cars sat down the block with their lights off. No sirens, no shouted names, the kind of quiet that didn't belong to crime shows, only to paperwork and permission. A landlord stood on the sidewalk with a ring of keys that looked too heavy for his wrist. He kept glancing at the building as if it might suddenly refuse him. The men with him spoke in low tones, each sentence short and clipped, like they didn't want the night to overhear. The entryway smelled like stale carpet and old cooking. The buzzer panel was scratched clean where names should have been, and the mailboxes wore the dents of 100 impatient hands. Someone held the door as the landlord found the right key by touch, not sight. They climbed the stairs instead of taking the elevator. The stairwell light buzzed and brightened in pulses, making everyone's shadows move in a way that felt wrong for a place that was supposed to be home. On the 3rd floor, the landlord stopped at a door with newer hardware than the others, an extra deadbolt that didn't match the building's standard. He slid the key in and turned it. The lock opened with a polite click. Inside, the air was stale and cool, like a room that had been closed too long and cleaned too well. The unit was furnished the way an unused place would be if someone wanted it to look unused. Cheap lamp, bare bulbs, a thin rug that didn't quite fit the space. The kitchen cabinets were empty. The refrigerator was plugged in but spotless. No smell of food. No forgotten bottle in the door. A stack of plates sat in one cupboard, white, unmarked, identical, as if chosen specifically for their lack of personality. The first thing one of the men noticed was what wasn't there. No laundry, no photographs, no clutter, no trash, no life. A small ashtray sat on the living room table with a single crushed cigarette butt in it, as if the person who smoked it had deliberately stopped at one and done, a controlled habit. Beside it, the surface of the table showed a faint rectangle where something had been placed and then lifted away. Dust had collected at the edges, leaving a clean imprint like a ghost of an object. One man moved slowly through the room, not touching anything he didn't need to. His flashlight beam skimmed baseboards, door frames, the underside of the kitchen counter. The light found tape residue, thin, clear adhesive in a strip under a shallow shelf near the phone jack, clouded with lint. He crouched and angled the beam. In the center of the residue was a perfect circular outline, just slightly darker than the surrounding dust, as if a coin had sat there long enough to press its own story into the grime. A faint ring, a small half-moon of missing dust where a thumb might have peeled tape away, 25 cents worth of absence. The landlord swallowed. He started, then stopped, as if he couldn't decide whether ignorance was safer than knowledge. In the bathroom, the cabinet held a new toothbrush, still in its wrapper, and nothing else. The shower curtain was dry. A bar of soap sat unused, edges sharp. In the bedroom, the closet held 2 empty hangers and a cardboard box with packing paper folded back into itself like it had been unpacked and repacked more than once. Nothing screamed. Everything whispered. A man at the doorway spoke again, quiet enough that the words barely carried. He cleared it fast. Another replied. He cleared what mattered. They didn't stay long. The room had the feel of something already abandoned, like a stage after the actors have slipped out through the back door, leaving only props that won't get missed. By the time the landlord locked up again, the street was still silent. The plain cars rolled away without drama, leaving the building to its ordinary night noises. A distant toilet flush, a dog shifting in sleep, a floorboard complaining. Days later, the grocery store's payphone vanished. Not with an announcement, not with a sign. One afternoon, the niche was empty, the wall scuffed where the metal box had been. A week after that, someone repainted the vestibule, a fresh, indifferent beige that made it harder to remember what had been there before. The cashier kept working her register. The routine returned the way routines always do: door chime, receipt tape, coins clinking into the tray, except now she heard the sound of a quarter differently. She kept the envelope at home, flattened in a drawer under takeout menus. The dates and circled times still legible if you knew what you were looking at. Sometimes, when the line thinned and the vestibule was quiet, she would look at the empty corner where the payphone used to sit and feel the strange unease of having been right in the middle of something without ever being invited into it. And somewhere else, another vestibule, another public hallway full of people who didn't look at each other, a different payphone, waited under a different fluorescent hum. A single quarter sat where it wasn't supposed to,